Hello, Ruth. Good to meet you. Thank you for
Hi, Emma. Good to meet you too.
yeah, thank you for joining me. Um, so we're going to just dive straight in then to getting to know each other by asking you a bit about your journey into Quakers. So, can you tell me something about how long have you been in Quakers? What drew you to uh, meeting the first time, and what did you find that made you stay?
Yes, I've not been a Quaker officially for very long, a few years. And however, like many friends that I've met, I have once I became a Quaker, as it were, I felt that I'd always been a Quaker. So it was finding my spiritual home as opposed to joining something external. It resonated with me, that the Quaker faith resonated with me very deeply in ways that surprised and delighted and relieved me, really, because I was unsettled spiritually.
Hmm.
That sounds very grand, doesn't it? But I was I think that's the best way I can put it. And to be honest, it's nice to be able to use that word spiritual because I struggled with it. I think that's why it sounds a bit grand as I put it just now, because I would never have used that word before becoming a Quaker. I had no idea what it meant in the context of Christianity. And now I feel much more comfortable with that term. And indeed, it's a term that I reach for when when speaking about why I'm here, in why I'm a Quaker, and how much it's helped me. Suddenly, the word spiritual actually has a meaning for me. I think it's the fact that it's freed. The word is freed. Spirituality has become freed from enigmatic and sometimes dogmatic features of Christianity that never I never really understood and never really understood them. So I was brought up in the Church of England,
Hmm.
which was fine at first, I think. It was a quite a Quakerly little church actually in Southampton where I grew up in Lord's Hill. There was a lovely little church. It was just a little hall. There was no airs and graces. There was no it was very plain, very simple, and just a simple wooden cross at the centre point, plastic chairs. And yeah, that was good. And my mum asked me when I was 5 if I wanted to let Jesus into my life. She said he was knocking on my door, and I think that's probably biblical. And I I said yes, and I accepted Jesus into my life. And I think that was a good resource to have growing up, believing in God as the origin of love. And I had a pink highlighter pen when I was little, and in my Bible, my vast Bible, um, sort of Good News Bible, I think it was called, and I highlighted where it said God is love in the Bible, and that's the only bit that ever really meant anything to me in the Bible, really. Even now, looking back, when I untangle everything, that's what it comes down to, even now. So yeah, I started off in this kind of harmless sort of environment of Christianity. Um, Although I think there were behind the scenes difficulties there. Um, I think I'm a feminist, and I think that I recognise patriarchy, and I think that there were some unhealthy dynamics going on there um, among some of the elders, and that disturbs me. Um, so yeah, it was a when I was growing up, my mum's severely mentally ill, and that made her vulnerable. And unfortunately, that included places like churches.
Mm.
Maybe especially so because of the power structures, because when you get power, you tend to get abuse of power. So there was that. I think I even recognized that dynamic, which would have been going on way before I was born as well in her life. But yeah, so I kind of came into Christianity, and that was good fun, Sunday school and whatnot. And then then eventually, yeah, I don't know how much church really meant to me. I took it all very seriously. I was a very earnest kind of child, and I was very serious about God and about Jesus and about right and wrong. I took it all very seriously, heaven, and I felt very sorry when I'd done something wrong, and yeah, it gave me a kind of inward-looking morality. I think I did become more and more worried about hell and sin. That started to confuse me and to worry me. And I once spoke to a pastor or vicar, whichever one it was, and told him I was worried about Judgment Day, and he wasn't able to relieve that anxiety really. So I just felt at sea with it. Um, and then I ended up had a bit of a turbulent childhood, really quite an unhappy childhood. A lot of my childhood was quite difficult, although there were inevitably fun bits too, particularly with my sister Lucy, who, yeah, that was we had some good times together. But yeah, it wasn't an easy time for me, and I was always lacking a bit of an anchor. But Christianity really wasn't that for me, I don't think, like it was for some people. So yeah. And by the way, Christianity was a big part of the way I see it. It was a big part of the culture that I was brought up in and that we all are, in the UK. It was a big part of that. And it was a big part of my family's culture as well. So, two of my uncles are vicars,
Mm.
and, you know, all of them are very, very, very Christian. Christianity was taken very seriously in my family. And both sides, my mum and my dad's, very, very Christian kind of family culture. And yeah, I was questioning Christianity from quite a young age, and it's not really welcomed. They have not. I mean, it wasn't in my experience, I should say. It may be in other places, but I think there's sort of time and a place for questioning, like the alpha courses, perhaps. But I was interested in more dynamic, on the go questioning whatever I heard. I wanted to know where I stood. I wanted to orient myself, I think, in the faith. Did it mean something to me? Did it sit well? Because the stakes are high. It's heaven and hell. It's belief. It's authenticity. It's who you are. It's important for that to work. Otherwise, you do end up with this kind of cognitive dissonance, which is uncomfortable. And for me, it was a deeply kind of, like I kind of alluded to earlier, I became very unsettled spiritually,
Mm.
lots of kind of aspects of it. But when I got to secondary school, I hadn't been to church for a while. I think I was bored by it in the end. And um, yeah, hadn't really been for a while, I don't think. And then my best friend at school, her dog died, and she decided it was a good idea to commemorate him by going to church. So we found a church in Southampton. It was a big church, not a church that me or her recognised in its um, in the way it did things. So it was a, what do you call them? Charismatic church, evangelical church. It's like being at a concert or something. It's big, big round, big dome place with a stage, and instead of having a acoustic guitar, you got all these electric guitars and stuff like that, and it's like a stadium. It's an experience. It's like being at a cultural event, like a concert or a football match or something like that. You get this kind of collective consciousness going on. It seems emphasized in a place like that, and that knocked me down. Like I couldn't, not literally, I must add, but it did. Wow, that was really quite something. I'd never seen anything like that. Um, I think it was an experience, and at first it seemed exciting. It was very different. It was very big and loud, and there were lots of people there. Um, there were boys there, and I was at an all-girls school. That was my, yeah, that was a heavy motivation for both of us, to be honest. Um, yeah, and it was excitement. Well, before that we were just hanging around in town, going to HMV, going to Woolworths, getting some pick and mix sweets and things. There wasn't a lot to do. So yeah, I'm stuck in this all girls school. It seemed like a good idea to keep going. But it was overwhelming and it was baffling to both of us. It's fine we sort of shelved that feeling of deep discomfort, I think, because it seemed exciting. But yeah, they preaching was quite emotional and sure of itself. And I was never sure of Christianity, whereas these people were very, very sure of themselves and what they were saying. Um, there was a lot of emphasis on the gifts of the spirit. So there was lots of speaking in tongues and prophecy and this sort of thing. I'll tell you something funny. I was at this, so there was a youth group that met on a Saturday night, and then there was the Sunday where everybody was there in the congregation, and then the youth group, probably the adults as well, was divided into cell groups. So we'd go around someone's house and then pray for each other and that sort of thing. I remember my first ever cell group, and they said, "We're going to go around the circle and see what gifts you have." And they said, "Ruth, what gifts have you had? What gifts have you got?" And I said, "I can play the clarinet." And then it went round and they looked at me like, okay. And it went round and other people listed prophecy and tongues and all this sort of thing. I was like, oh no, yeah, I
Mm.
think I understood that context. But there you go. Yeah, this religious language wasn't in my lexicon, not really. I didn't really understand all these things, but it felt like to be a good Christian, I needed to get good at them. I needed to kind of learn how to speak in tongues. I needed these gifts. Um, Whereas for me, intuitively, it was the fruits of the spirit that really resonated with me more. So there's stuff like love and peace, the sorts of things now I associate with my Quaker faith, I guess. Um, yeah, all that kind of thing. It frightened me actually. People speaking in tongues, couldn't understand them.
Mm.
People falling over, routinely kind of falling over and laughing uncontrollably and all this sort of thing. And I, I'm, it wasn't for me, and yet I kept going with my friend. I think we burst into tears once, both of us, because we just didn't feel it didn't feel right. It didn't feel comfortable, and it's not always clear in life whether you're emotionally reacting to something because you're not used to it, and whether you might grow by getting used to it, or if something within you, something fundamental and honest and authentic, is telling you actually no, that's not that's not right. You're upset because you know at a deep level that this isn't right, or not right for me anyway. So yeah, I think both of us, me certainly, I'll talk about me, not her, but I don't want to speak for her. I felt inadequate quite quickly. I felt like I wasn't spiritual enough. I tried to speak in tongues, like they prayed endlessly for me to be able to speak in tongues, and I couldn't do it. Um, yeah, I was naughty. I pretended to speak in tongues on one occasion, so that it stopped praying for me, I think, for that one. Um, I was going through things at home that I really did need kind of help with and support with, but all this stuff, there was a lot of emphasis on the relationship with God, a personal relationship with God, and I never really understood that either. So I I just never felt God. It was a constant kind of feeling God, and that was causing people to fall over or whatever it was, or to express joy or tears or strong emotions. And I never, I couldn't honestly tell anybody or myself or kid myself into thinking that I'd felt God. I didn't quite understand. Was it that I wasn't grasping the fact that it was a metaphorical conversation, or was there something literal? Were they directly being impacted by God? I don't know. But it wasn't something that I understood, and that wasn't something I felt part of. And I felt less and less connected. I say less and less connected to God. I don't know if I ever felt connected to God. I felt I was able to love. I was able to recognize good from bad, and compassion and kindness.
Mm.
Um, but I never really felt that God spoke to me. To this day, I've never felt like that. So, not, I'll come, that's not quite right. I don't know. I'll come to that later. But yeah, I'd never heard God. I never felt God. Nothing like that. I didn't know what that constituted, what that meant. Um, so I ended up, things at home weren't great. Things at school weren't great. Things at church, I was feeling like I wasn't getting it. Um, wasn't very good Christian, I suppose. So I ended up being quite rebellious, I suppose. Used to just smoke um, at the back. We spent a lot of time outside. So whenever there was something like a sermon or something like that, I just ended up outside smoking. Spent a lot of time outside smoking. Um, and, drink alcohol as well, not during church. I might have done once, actually. We were naughty. But, you know, but it was, I don't know, it's just, I think I was just trying to find myself. I was trying to stabilize myself. I was trying to find my crew, my people, my place in the world, having struggled to in all these places where I was supposed to feel a sense of belonging. So yeah, I ended up getting angrier and angrier with don't know what, God, the church, Christianity,
Mm.
religion. I got more and more annoyed with it. Um, I didn't like, I wasn't sure about all the doctrine. I would question it often. Um, and I didn't like the high stakes of praying, having to pray for my friends at school because otherwise they'll go to hell. I didn't like that. Um, I was listening to, I found my peace and my escape and my comfort in music. I was listening to metal, I was listening to stuff that I had no idea what was going on in their lyrics. I look back now and go, good dear me, um, about all sorts of things. Um, yeah, that were kind of coded, so I didn't understand what they meant at the time. But yeah, I was listening to kind of metal music, and I loved it, and it made me feel happy, and it gave me a strength, and it gave me an identity, and the more I listened to music and the more I did that, the less I felt like I needed to go to church and happier I started to feel. And so, in the end, through thinking about kind of, because a lot of stuff that I've always listened to is kind of concept albums and sort of prog rock as well, quite thoughtful lyrics. I used to listen to Marillion a lot, I still do, um, as well as the more kind of heavier stuff. And I ended up, yeah, I was a thinker. I've always been a thinker.
Mm.
So I've always asked questions and I've always cared about fairness. And I was always shut down. I was always told from a very young age, it's just the way it is. Life's not fair. And that was never satisfying to me.
Mm.
And when you're just discarded, oh, you're just young, you don't get it, that's just, you're saying life's not fair because you're badly behaved or because you're spoiled or something, rather than because there might be something in that intuition. But yeah, it's something that never quite went away. Um, I cared about social justice from a very young age. I mean, I guess I was well placed to care about social justice because my mum was marginalised, could see that constantly, in the sense that she was a woman, she wasn't taken very seriously, she was uneducated, wasn't taken very seriously, she was mentally unwell, again, not taken very seriously, infantilized kind of thing,
Mm.
patronized. Um, yeah, she's a very spiritual person and a very wise person. She sees people, she sees past all the rubbish. She's able to understand all sorts of kind of um, ineffable things. Um, yeah, not academic so much. Whereas my dad's very academic, went to Oxford, and from a very academic family, and I think that was really tough for her. Um, oh, I'm getting lost now. Where was I going with this?
Well, you were telling me about music being an important part of
Oh yeah,
finding yourself.
and social justice coming up in that, in my music and in my thoughts. Well, anyway, I remember saying to my dad in the car on the way to college, I said to him, "Why is it that a bus driver doesn't get paid the same amount as an MP? Why is that? Because we need both. How would the MP get to Parliament without the bus?" And it's quite simplistic, but it kind of stayed, that kind of thinking. So, we need everybody in society. Why are arbitrarily some people valued more than others? Why are some people able to live more, significantly more comfortable life with the sorts of things that make human beings more stable and happy and comfortable and feel, I think the more valued we feel, the happier we feel. Like, someone with status, I think they begin to feel more secure, more happy, more kind of content within their own meaning and value. Whereas someone who's mentally ill and can't work, there's no status in that.
Mm.
Now I'm seeing there's no status in disability, there's no status in being, certain working class contexts. And yet we need all these, we need everybody in society, not just the ones that get recognized through academia or connections or um, color of their skin, their background, all these factors that privilege people. You know, I think I could see from quite a young age how arbitrary they were and how unfair that was, and how if God is love, then we are all God's children, we all matter, it shouldn't be the case that some people are seen as lesser than others. And yet I could see that very clearly. I could see it in my own family and I could see it around me.
Mm.
Um, yeah, so I ditched the church. I was angry with the church. I ditched that when I started going out to clubs like goth clubs early from a young age, earlier like younger than I should have been with a fake ID that I photocopied. I just never get away with that now. But I photocopied my college ID in the library, and anyway, that worked somehow. Um, and yeah, I just used to go to this club called the Dungeon, and I was just never, with a few people from my college, and we just never in any fit state for learning. Although I did love history of art, absolutely loved it, and I loved my teacher, and she gave me so much. She gave me so much love and so much. She gave me the idea that actually I could be somebody, and I actually wrote well, and my thoughts were not silly. She actually gave me so much positive feedback for my analysis of art, and then the politics and all the sort of cultural contexts around that. And we had some great conversations, and I had a kind of hint that things could be better and things could be, and actually I could find my place in the world. But I never really had enough in me. I never had enough about me to kind of realize that actually working hard was a really good idea. And I just was too flaky. So I just used to I didn't have anything or anyone really to put me on to keep me on the path that would have eventually been more beneficial. So I was kind of floating around in quite self-destructive spaces, and I was vulnerable, and I had no idea of my own vulnerability. Really, couldn't really appreciate that. I'd all but given up on God. Really, I was still calling myself a Christian though. It was something that I'd brought up with it'd been everything. It was such a kind of pivotal part of who I was and how I was brought up that I was still calling myself a Christian, and I still had a lot of emotional attachment to that. I remember someone in the club that I used to go to suggesting to me that God didn't exist and arguing with me about it. I like arguing, and I always like arguing then. I still like arguing now. I get called opinionated, sometimes not in the best light.
Mhm.
But yeah, I got really upset. I didn't even think I was going to. It just came, I just started crying because I was upsetting me that he was pulling the rug from under me. Even then, even when I was angry and questioning it all, I think when he suggested God didn't exist and gave these arguments that I wasn't able to really satisfactorily answer, it just stressed me out. That whole thought, that whole idea really stressed me out. And it happened again. I used to go to this graveyard with my friend who also liked goth music and Marillion. Um, but we used to go to this graveyard and smoke and eat sweets and talk about lyrics and talk about morality and talk about philosophy and that sort of thing. Um, and where was I going with that? Oh yeah, and he started talking to me about evolution, and I knew about evolution obviously, but he kind of connected that he was pointing out the disconnects between that and Christianity in quite an explicit way, and that really upset me. I just really, it's just it really, I think I thought that I was parking it for a bit, Christianity. I think I thought that I was kind of that particular Christianity, that religious aspect wasn't working for me. It was good to be out of it, but it persisted within me. This faith persisted. I hated it. It was annoying. It was like
Mm.
I just don't want to be a Christian. I just want to sleep around, and I just want to take loads of drugs, and I want to do all these things and without having this conscience, this kind of, oh, what would God think about that? You go to hell. You know, I didn't want the baggage. I didn't want to be a Christian. It was annoying, but I couldn't help it. I just had this inner. And I'm not going to tell you it's profound either. I don't know if it was. I think it was just literally I was taught that, and I was given a lot of kind of, I don't want to say propaganda, but I was just given a lot of religious stuff, wasn't I? I was kind of brought up with the Bible. I was brought up with religious teachings, and it has gone because I'm a sensitive person now, and I was always such a sensitive little girl, and it all went in there very earnestly, you know. So I really found that a barrier to having fun. Um, I
Mm.
don't know if it ended up being a shield against things that were harming me, but I think it's a bit simplistic to say it was. I'm not sure if it was or not. I don't know. I still got harmed, even by, I still got harmed by, like I said, I wasn't aware of my own vulnerability and I wasn't treated well by men. Um, but anyway, that was there, that kind of fear and guilt, shame. I really think I'd have been better off without that. I really do. I really regret having all that rubbish within me.
Right.
But that's the way it was. That's just how it was. And it was much worse for my mum, I think, and much worse for other people. I just feel so glad that I was able to found Quakerism. I really am. It was the making of me. So anyway, I so here's me doing all sorts of naughty things that I shouldn't be doing and feeling bad about them. and and then I I had sort of quite a very turbulent relationships with my folks kind of thing. And for reasons, all sorts of reasons that I don't really blame them for. I think they had a lot going on as well.
Mm.
Um, but it wasn't easy at all. I went to Romania, a place called Onești, and I stayed and worked in an orphanage after not long after Ceausescu had fallen, and oh, that hit me hard. That really hit me hard.
Mm.
That was I wasn't very old, I don't know, I was 17, 18 or something. And I went there and terrible things had happened to these children. Um, oh, sorry. Yeah, terrible things had happened to these babies and children. They'd been abandoned, they'd been abused. Awful. I loved them very much. The smell was terrible as well. The whole place was literally a graveyard. There's graves all over the place. It was hot. It was very, very hot. 40 degrees. I hate hot weather, and it was really, really, really hot, really stifling, really thick air. It was sad, but I loved it. I really loved it. That was a spiritual. I loved it. I loved it from something deep within me, something I love so strong that it could not have come from me. That's
Mm.
how it felt. This didn't originate. I'm so flawed. I've been telling you about how flawed I am, but this was the compassion in me. My parents, my grandparents had told me that the reason I can love is because God first loved me, because that's what the Bible teaches us, and that I could really get behind. And I've suggested that to my daughter, my non-disabled daughter, and I haven't told her that like it's fact, but I have suggested it to her because I think it's quite a good. I think it's nice. I think it makes sense. It still makes sense to me. So I was moved, and I was able to understand. I was able to think about social justice and love, compassion in a really immediate, visceral way. I got on with these, there was this baby who I used to hang out with a lot. There was this toddler. She was just lovely. She was so sweet. She was stealing from me the whole time. There was a there was a point where I just felt hurt by that, but then that didn't last very long because I knew. why that I would be the same. I think any of us would do the same. We look at homeless people, don't we? Well, not we, some people, a lot of people. I'm not going to give money to a homeless person because they'll just spend it on heroin. Well, wouldn't you if you're freezing cold? They're just what any of us would be doing. You look at a homeless person and you go, well, that's me in the guise of someone else. You look at a migrant, that's me. We're all each other. I really think that. And yeah, so I recognise that she's just doing what any of us were doing. She's behaving like a human being under those particular circumstances, and they were hard circumstances. And I hope that I'd made some difference to her. She definitely made a difference to me. Um, yeah, it was uncomfortable in so many ways. The last day, because I wasn't there very long, I was only there a week or something.
Oh gosh.
On the last day, I didn't even mean to do. Where we slept, there was cockroaches everywhere and stuff. I just remember being upstairs in this orphanage, and there was this room. I'd never been shown it. I didn't even know it was there. I didn't even know it had anyone in it, and it did. It had it had a boy who was profoundly disabled, like my eldest daughter. I don't know if he had cerebral palsy, but he had profound multiple complex disabilities, and I found him. I told somebody, and they said, "Well, we just leave him. He can't do anything." They just left him. That's why I wasn't told, because he didn't matter. He was too disabled. He was deemed too disabled to kind of bother with. And I bothered with him, and I held his hand for over an hour, and I tickled him, and he smiled, and he responded, and he loved it. And I wished I could stay with him. And I left after that. We all had to go and get the plane home. And I remember when we got on the plane and when we were about to land, someone said, "Oh, thank God, back to civilization." And I felt really angry with them. I didn't say anything and couldn't. I was far too shy. But I was really angry
Mm.
because I felt like a hypocrite. I felt like a I felt like someone who was just appropriating someone else's suffering so that I could feel like a good person. It felt awful, horrible. Like, you know, I can talk to you, I can go on YouTube and go, oh, isn't she a good person? She went to Romania when she was 17 or whatever. But I didn't want that. I didn't want people to think that or to say that or to, I, yeah, didn't feel good. I would have been good if I'd stayed there, if I had actually put my life into being part of it, not just going there for a week. So I probably gave myself a really bad time, really kind of hard time over that. I think I was very didn't know what to think. I needed guidance. Like many times in my life, I really needed guidance. I needed some kind of anchor to say, these to help me process my feelings because it was a lot.
Yeah.
When I got home, it was hot, but it wasn't as hot as it had been in Romania. And my mum was there at the door. I never quite knew what was going to happen when I came home. And she just asked for a cuddle. I was cold. I was freezing cold, even though it was hot. It just wasn't as hot. Ask her for a cuddle, and instead she decided it wasn't a good idea for me to be living there anymore. So I had to go and live with my boyfriend. Um, and that wasn't good because it was not a great relationship. And um, it was just, yeah, not a very good time in general. And yeah, I just had to do what I could to survive. Something I probably learnt from my mum, who did that to a much greater extent. Um, you know, she turned to the church so often and was made to feel the full force of her own vulnerability. I didn't turn to any churches around that time. Um, but I was very, very vulnerable and yeah, had no idea that I was, but yeah, very, very vulnerable. Um, and yeah, men weren't good to me back then. I ended up living in this shared house. Couldn't understand this, but I used to do all this washing up, so much washing up for everybody that lived there. And this guy, because I felt so guilty for being there rent free. So I just wanted to do as much washing up as possible to kind of earn my keep. And then the guys just said to me, there's other ways you could pay. And I didn't know what he meant because I just didn't put two and two together at all. But yeah, it was all a bit creepy. And yeah, and I used to go to all these gigs, these goth gigs across the country in vans and people with cars and things like that. And yeah, I was, yeah, put me in a position where I was able to kind of really get on board with the whole Me Too movement, put it that way. Yeah, see what women go through, just normalized harassment, sexual abuse that women have to put up with all the time. I was very much privy to that. And yeah, faith was a long way away at this point, I think. I went to university and I went to university. Well, I went back to college because I told you I wasn't really focusing on my work, so I screwed up my A levels. They weren't very good, so I went back in to do health and social care because my mum was she was mentally unwell, and I thought maybe I could be a psychiatric nurse. That's what she wanted me to be.
Okay.
Um, but they recognised me there. The teachers, they liked me, and which was nice. And they told me that I should be a doctor, not because I said I was going to do this and then be a nurse
Mm,
because I didn't think I was very clever, and because I they were giving out bursaries back then, so you didn't need loads of A levels. You
mm,
just you just
right.
they just put you in, just inserted you in there. So I didn't have any, you know, faith in my ability to do anything. I didn't really think about anything I really wanted to do. They said, no, you should be a doctor. But, I said, no, I couldn't do that. I always doubted my academic ability and held myself back, you know. Um, so anyway, I did that GMVQ, ended up at university studying nursing. Hated it. I mean, I never liked bodies and unwellness, and I don't know what on earth I was. Anyway, I was always very squeamish, and we had this lecture on hand washing, and I just walked out, and that was that. But I was now in Southampton University, and never could have got into a university like that through
Mm,
any other route. So I thought, well, now I'm here, I'll switch over to something I actually care about. So I switched over to history of art, Winchester School of Art. Um, but again, I found it so hard to discipline myself.
mm,
I wasn't really enjoying it. It wasn't really that fun. I didn't find it that. I didn't love it like I had at A level. It was kind of, I don't know if it was the modules we were doing or what, but I wasn't able to really get my teeth into it. Didn't write very much. I think there was 12 essays I should have written, and I'd written one. And then I realized that what I really wanted to do, what I really loved was philosophy. And I'd read about the course and that kind of thing. And I got to the department and I said, please take me on. If you take me in, I'll get a first. You won't regret it. I'll work really hard. They asked me some questions, read my one essay, and they let me do it. And that was really the first thing that was the making of me.
gosh.
That was absolutely brilliant. Um, I was able to study the philosophy of religion, which was great, amongst other things. My favorite was Nietzsche. So it gave me this kind of perspective on religion and faith that really fed into you were right to doubt it. Or was it, well, not right? There was validity in doubting it, shall we say. It was not something that could be so easily dismissed. I loved the stuff Nietzsche talked about God is dead, and we live in the dead God's shadow. I was like, yeah, we absolutely do. And I do. I live in the dead God's shadow. This is what I alluded to earlier about the shame, the guilt, all this kind of heaviness of sin, the inevitability of it. And it really, really spoke to me, and it was freeing for me. It felt good.
Mm,
But atheism, I mean, that's kind of where most people think go with that. It's where my lecturer, who I thought very highly of, really looked up to, is where he'd gone with that. I just found it, I just couldn't, I just couldn't. This annoying faith, this reluctant faith. I wrote a poem about that. It's called Reluctant Faith. Didn't like it, didn't want it. It was just hindering me, but I couldn't be an atheist. The thought of it was just awful to me. Um, yeah, so did I did well with my philosophy degree, absolutely loved it. It wasn't plain sailing because of blokes, basically, but it was, and I wasn't very good at having relationships because things have been so difficult for me. Um, yeah, but whenever I kind of worked, whenever I actually applied myself and worked, it went very, very well. And I was able to just, I absolutely loved learning about Kant and writing about Kant and Hume and Nietzsche and Sartre and all these wonderful philosophers. It was just magic. I adored it. So I had music that just made me feel alive. Then I had philosophy that made me feel alive. And um, yeah, and then after that, I ended up not really knowing what to do with my life. Didn't have any real, never had any faith in my abilities or anything like that. I didn't know how to turn my philosophy degree into something that would pay me money. Um, and I had panic attacks, had the most awful panic attacks. They were just debilitating. You know, I just used to shake, like really badly shaking, really kind of heart going, and just I hated social situations. I hated speaking in public, even if it was a tiny amount of people. Had all these piercings in my face, and I remember I remember in one lesson at college, I had to read a short excerpt from this play, and I ripped my eyebrow piercing out rather than reading it out because I needed an excuse to leave, and that made sense at the time. But I mean, that was big. It made sense because it was what I couldn't think of anything worse than humiliating myself by, yeah. So I'd rather have blood coming down my face. Um, but yeah, yeah. It was yeah. I was held back by lack of faith in my abilities and dreadful anxiety, social anxiety, panic attacks. Used to go to the doctor about it and things like that, and it was very difficult to do anything about it or do anything with it, and it made me feel, I felt a lot of shame around that as well, which wasn't helping anything. Anyway, um, yeah, so I ended up doing care work, which was not good. So I worked with disabled children who were lovely, amazing, disabled young adults in supported living and that kind of thing. And it was an absolute nightmare because I could see how care homes should not be businesses. They were businesses, and workers were exploited. Like, again, I can see the social justice stuff was happening to me in the sense that I was doing things like working way too many hours and not being paid for them and being lied to and being exploited as a worker. Worse, the people that we were looking after, I could see how vulnerable they were and how, in order to give these people what they deserve, it took more than what you were paid to do. You had to go over and above what you were paid to do. You had to be a good person. You had to recognize how special and wonderful and brilliant and valuable these wonderful people were. And they were so funny. They were so, I got on famously with everybody I worked with. Called them service users at the time. And yeah, we were in their home, and yeah, I saw all sorts of things that made me start to realize and see up close that society was not built for everybody.
Mm.
I knew this from a young age, but this allowed me to connect more dots. Society was built and designed by non-disabled privileged people for non-disabled privileged people. Um, it wasn't built for people who don't have these privileges, and therefore they are subject to, they're more more vulnerable to abuse, more vulnerable to harm. So that was, yeah, not a good time. It had some good moments, but yeah, I was troubled at that time by what I was seeing and what I was
Mm.
experiencing. And because I was trying to keep my head above water, in shared houses and stuff like that, I wasn't able to really step back enough to be able to assess it properly, I don't think. So I had to manage everything I was learning and seeing with all these shifts I was doing and all this sort of thing. Difficult home life continuing and that sort of thing, as in back home with my parents, all that sort of difficulties continuing on. And then when, and then eventually, I, enough was enough. I decided to do maths GCSE in evening classes. I had attempted that again so many times and not bothered with it. I didn't see the point in maths, but I really enjoyed it in the end in evening classes. I did enjoy that. I like the logic of it. Um, and I passed that, and I decided to become a teacher, which seemed just anathema to me because that would involve speaking in front of people, and I'd get panic attacks, and I was worried about that. But I I went to train to be a teacher, a philosophy lecturer at A level. And I met this guy and we had a bit of a plan. He would support me while I did that. And then I would support him when he did his. So I wasn't paying rent for that time. I was living with him and I was doing my training, my teacher training in the New Forest. And then I got a job, and that's where I live now in Havering, East London, in a sixth form college. Supported him to do his training to be a teacher as well, and then got married and had my first baby, and had my baby in 2017. And she, after a couple of weeks, started having seizures, really awful seizures, relentless seizures. She just used to, it felt like my breast milk was causing them because I'd breastfeed her, and then she would seize. Her eyes would glaze over, and she would seize, and she wouldn't, and it would go on and get longer and longer and longer, and then she'd be exhausted, and then she'd try and go to sleep, still breastfeeding, and then she'd have another one. They were just, every time she went to sleep, she'd have one. Every time she woke up, she'd have one, and it was becoming obvious it wasn't normal, but I had kid myself into thinking it, hoping it was, because nothing had prepared me for that. I wanted to have what, when you have a baby, you don't just have a baby, a whole culture opens up, a whole language game, a whole way of life. Um, can't remember, I was trying to think what Wittgenstein calls it, but a whole kind of way of being. It's like a where there's new rules, there's you become um, enrolled in a culture, and I was outside of that. All the language, all the expectations, all the kind of mental processes, all the kind of um, cognitive and neural pathways that go with parenting. I was outside of so many of those because my baby kept having seizures. She cried constantly, and it wasn't. And as a lovely priest I know said when he visited, because I was desperate and I didn't know what else to do, he said that's not a peaceful cry, and it wasn't. It wasn't like a, what when babies cries or wah wah. It was not good. It was not a good cry, and I had no idea what to do. She couldn't see me there's this whole thing about breastfeeding and how you look into each other's eyes and it's supposed to be dead special, but she couldn't see me. Um, I just the only connection I had with her was breastfeeding. That's the only thing I could do. I didn't know what else to do. Keep her warm and love her. Sometimes she didn't want to be touched. She didn't want, it was a terrifying experience, harrowing. Grenfell had just happened, and I was listening to Radio 4 in bed, breastfeeding her, and I felt it so keenly. I felt the sorrow and the injustice and the heartbreak. My heart was reaching out to the victims at Grenfell. And yeah, I just felt I was on my knees. I was absolutely on my knees and I wasn't admitting what was happening with my daughter. I kept looking things up on Google, like, oh, is it normal to have this? Is it normal to have texting someone, did your baby do this? I knew it wasn't. And as time went on, it became harder to ignore that. But I'd take her to these baby groups and baby sensory and things like that. And she'd just cry and cry and cry, scream and scream and scream. And she would, yeah, have seizures. Um, yeah. Anyway, I took her to the hospital. They needed to see a video before they would do anything. It was a lot of waiting for hours and hours. It was traumatic. Honestly, it was. It was just, firstly, being taken seriously was a challenge, even though she was having seizures. I mentioned actually that I mentioned this guy, this priest guy, really good friend. He's very down to earth. I wasn't really used to down to earth priests. He was dead sound. He was someone I could talk to as a friend. Um, and when I had my baby, first of all, I suddenly became something changed in me. In fact, it did before then, because I had a miscarriage, by the way, as well before that. And that was a lonely, isolating experience. But I'd started going to church. All this time, I thought, right, I'm married, I've got a kid, it's time to go to church. I've changed. I need to have community. There's just us two. We are in Havering. We're away from, we're not in Southampton anymore. We don't have any friends or family around. We need community. We need love. Even if I'm not wild about the faith, I've got enough of it in me to identify as a Christian. I can get back to that. Maybe I can be more Christian than I've ever been. Maybe now I'm older and more mature and have a baby and my priorities are set and I've got this family, I can be a better Christian than I ever was. Maybe it will mean something more to me. And maybe now I'm not in a charismatic church and it's a Anglican church and it's a bit more chilled, then it will mean I won't be expected to fall over and things like that. I don't have to experience so much cognitive dissonance. But of course I did. Every time there was a Bible story, I was like, oh, hang on, what about this? I need to, no, no, I can't be right because of this. And I needed to challenge it. I needed to talk about it. And and it didn't really sit well. But, I mean, that wasn't working anyway, just for practical, just logistically. She would just cry and cry and cry. Or the priest, who was lovely, by the way. This priest was the what do they call them? Curate at the time. He's a priest now, but there's this other guy who's the priest. And he used to kind of, he was so lovely, but he did make, like people do, assumptions that she was non-disabled. So
Mm.
he would just sort of say things that weren't applying to her. For example, you know, referring to her babbling, which she never did, and now is non-speaking. Um, anyway, things like that. Although no, she did do a bit of babbling later on, but the point is, the sort of milestones weren't being reached, and he was sort of joyfully referring to things that were painful. Although I don't blame him for that. It's something that has got worse in all sorts of spheres as things have gone on. Um, so I mean, God. I'm not sure God or spirituality or faith. Then it was just more of a cultural thing. And actually, I do wonder if it all is a cultural thing. Anyway, and that's why I wasn't getting the whole relationship with God thing, because that's just what it is for everybody. I don't know. An open question. You tell me what does spirituality mean to you? But yeah, I was hoping for fellowship. I was hoping for that sort of thing. Things went very badly, as you know, and I before I knew it, we were in my local hospital for long stints of time where they tried to work out what the hell was wrong with her. It was obvious that they were stumped.
Mm,
Doctors were completely stumped. Like, what is going on? Why is she seizing and seizing? Why they were giving her these meds and they weren't working. I needed answers. I did some strange things, like I begged, put a Facebook post out, basically begging people to pray because I didn't know what else to do. I needed my baby to be okay. I was in that extra kind of protective mode that I believe is hormonal, chemical that all mums get, when they have a baby. It's like, my baby, really important. This is new. You become quite instinctual and
mm,
uh,
mm,
primal, about things. But yeah, they just didn't know what the fuck to do with her. And I could feel that for the first time ever. I could feel that these authoritative people who are supposed to be helping and supposed to be like gods, mortal gods, were just as fallible as anybody else and didn't have a clue. So yeah, desperately asking people publicly to pray for her, asking the priest I told you about, the curate, to do the same. His wife was doing it. All these people were praying for her. I was begging God in that hospital, God, please, you did it back in the day in the Bible, in the Old Testament. Do it now. Why can't? What's the difference? She deserves it. What possible? I taught about the problem of evil, but never really had the problem of evil kind of cause problems in such a heartbreaking and such a in such a way that was just finishing me off. Basically, it became a problem. It was making me worse. So my mental health was doing terribly, terribly. I needed her to be okay. I was fighting against what was happening. I could see what was something deep within me could see what was unfolding, and I just rejected it. I wasn't having it. I kept holding on to this whole idea of an interventionist God. That was my last hope, really. Medical science was letting me down, letting her down. And it just, yeah, I, it was complicating things for me. I had to wait for a diagnosis, which was taking forever because they do. Gene panels take such a long time. She ended up being diagnosed with CDKL5 deficiency disorder. CDKL5 is this gene linked to the X chromosome, and it produces a protein, and people with CDKL5 deficiency disorder don't have a functioning protein, which is why they are often profoundly disabled, like she is.
mm,
We were eventually told in Great Ormond Street after about 8 months that she would depend on a high level of care her entire life. She would, likely not walk or talk um, or anything like that, and essentially be like caring for a baby her whole life. And it was just the worst thing I could have heard. And I broke down and I cried and I cried. It was just the worst possible thing I could have been told. And all at once thinking things like, what about when I die? What then? Who's going to take care of her then? Who's going to love her as much as I love her? I did weird things around that time. I emailed the Archbishop of Canterbury. Why did I do that? Um, but I did because I just wanted someone high up to give a shit. I wanted him to care and pray. Someone closer to God than me. I obviously still maybe I still had that idea that there are weightier people than others, you
mm.
know. maybe I was still wedded to that idea of hierarchy, that I hated it. I hated hierarchy from our whole life. I've always hated it, and I've always known that it was messed up, I think, from a long time, from always had that instinct. But yeah, maybe a part of me was so wedded to that still that I thought maybe the top guy in the church would be better placed to pray for her. But I did, I told him how I was feeling. I told him about the worry about when I die and that kind of thing. Never got anything back. Um, yeah. But I who's that? Rowan, is it Rowan someone? Rowan
Atkinson.
Atkinson, yeah, him.
No, that's the author, Rowan Williams.
Rowan Williams, that's what I was thinking. Yeah, Rowan Williams. If you're watching, Rowan, no, yeah, but yeah, I got that diagnosis. I remember on the notes it said the mother didn't take it well or something. The mother was very low. That's an understatement. I don't know what the mother was expected to be. But I remember walking back to um the station on Great Ormond Street, Holborn, and all these people were walking along. It was weird. They were just walking along like nothing had happened, going about their day. It was the strangest thing. How's that? Life was moving on after this absolute. My world had been shaken to its core, and yet it just carried on
Mm.
over, and it made me. It was good in a sense. It gave me a shock of perspective. Things got easier from there with my. Things got better after the diagnosis because you can't fight something once you know it's there.
Mm.
It made it easier to process. Things were still hard. I had to fight, still have to fight for her all the time. And the worst thing about fighting is that it's not really fighting. It is and it isn't. It's kind of you have to fight because if you don't, you don't get what disabled children need. But you also have to manage people. You have to not fight aggressively because then you'll be called an aggressive woman or aggressive mother or whatever. Other feminist tropes, sorry, sexist, misogynist tropes. You have to avoid those by using the correct language, the correct facial expression. You have to manage yourself. You have to be a shapeshifter. You have to you have to make sure that what you're saying, you maintain a balance between when you know that maintaining relationships with people is going to be better for her because you only work together when you meet someone's needs. This is feeding into my sort of our peace testimony now, but like, how does peace work? You know, we can see someone who just seems incompetent, he doesn't care, who's got there for whatever reason, isn't paid very much, doesn't have much incentive to be better. It's no good shouting at them. It's
Mm.
that you need to somehow foster a relationship with that person. You need to kind of look past the ways that the hurtful things they've said to you in some cases, because people do routinely. People say ableist, disableist, terrible things. And they do it in society generally, but they also do it in the system.
Mm.
Within the system that's supposed to be there for disabled children and their carers, people say some terrible things. And it's because there's a systemic imbalance. It's because it's because disabled children are oppressed. It's because of the system being unsuitable, and that's why you get this kind of thing. But you have to navigate all of this, and it's not easy navigating it when you're weighed down by trauma. You end up letting a lot of things slip just because you haven't got the energy for it, or because the fight can go nasty, um, turn on you. You have to just be in protective mode, protect your child, protect yourself, protect your mental health, being competent at fighting in the right way. So advocating while maintaining the fine balance of making sure people like you or like you enough. And then, well, it's hard. I'm still not there now. But it involves top managerial skills that are not recognised in carers, in unpaid carers like myself. Absolutely that. You know, the wrong people out at the top. I don't believe in the top and the bottom, but yeah, I do think people could learn a lot from care workers and care unpaid carers like me. But anyway, so I was thinking again about my faith as things got a bit more settled after that. And I read something on Twitter about Quakers. I knew about Quakers because there's this film that I really like called Bedlam, black and white film, and there was a Quaker dude in that, and he was kind and calm and good, and I always thought he had a nice hat, and and it was just it's a brilliant film, but you know, I had some awareness, and then I looked at the values of Quaker. I thought, goodness gracious me, look at that. They're my values. They're my values. It says that there is that of God, the inmost light within us all, including my daughter. In her, she has got that. I could see the light. It is so obvious. You would see it if you met her. She's just incredible. She is has the inmost light is in abundance in her. And it's much brighter than in me. And yeah, that's what I needed. There's no hierarchy in Quakers. Yes, that's what we need. We need a recognition that anybody could minister, anybody, God, we are all God's children. It took the tenets of Christianity, what it meant to me, what it should have been, and it ran with that. And I think it just got better and better from that. It really did. I was so excited around this time. So the thing that got to me, that used to get to me about Christianity in the church context was about I didn't like the idea that you'd go there every Sunday, you'd learn things, you'd be read these Bible stories that I didn't always agree with or had questions about. And then what? I didn't understand the point. It just felt like why do this ritual? Is it cultural? Is that why? Just because we've always done it? Is it because um is it because we're scared of going to hell? Because hell, it would be pretty scary, an eternity in hell. You know, so is it a kind of trying to avoid that? Is it, and if so, that seems like quite a self-interested reason to go to church to keep yourself out of hell. Do I want to be governed by a fear of hell? You know, that feeds into mental illness, like my mum's. Do I want that? Do I think that's healthy? Thinking about Nietzsche and what he taught about affirming life rather than denying life. That was all going around my head. You know, it wasn't producing succor for me, it was producing just anxiety. And I wanted faith to be active. I thought they were my ideas. I thought, wouldn't it be great if you actually lived your faith? That's not my ideas. This is just evidence that our Quaker testimony, that our Quaker faith actually originates in a person's heart, and that Quakers can actually look at each other and hold hands and say, "Yeah, I feel what you feel. I feel that we're all equal. I know that we are all equal. I don't know. I'm agnostic. God, not God, whatever. The light. There is something greater than us. There's something from which love originates. I believe that loves all of us equally. That would be horrified at the way we've ordered each other in importance. You know, horrified at how we have marginalized people from the global majority, people are, people who are disabled, women and girls, the way we've marginalized people, LGBT plus people, we marginalize and we rank people and it's not good. You look at someone, you look up a politician or a doctor, and yeah, I don't think you're going to find the things you're looking for. That is my fine. That's what I've found. I've seldom been inspired by these people in high places. I'm inspired by other mothers, other mother carers who've got four disabled children. I mean, come on, that's a hero, isn't it? Four disabled children who, I'm inspired by people who I'm inspired when I'm reading about people from Victorian England, women who were forced into prostitution, with nothing, women who had no options, who were somehow able to live a life just surrounded by oppression. I just think I'm reading about what it means to be a Quaker just felt like home. It was the greatest feeling. It was like I could it was like I had the backpack, Peggy, what's her name? Oh, there was a scholar that talked about a backpack, a rucksack where you carry all these prejudices. And how it's a good idea to take it to rummage through there and think about what you need and what you don't need, what's weighing you down, what's stopping you from progressing. But a lot of that religious dogma and a lot of that shame and guilt and all the questions and all the disconnects, all the cognitive dissonance, I was able to shed all of that. I feel lighter and freer and more able to be me. You
Mm.
know, I'm a work in progress and I'm it, in the journey of becoming who I am, shedding all of that baggage has just been completely revelatory for me. It's been a wonderful thing. It's allowed me to do so much that I couldn't do before. And then the next thing was being the way we worship. So being in my place of worship locally in Romford, I was sat in this circle. It was extraordinary. My first meeting for worship. It felt like it felt like a tidied room. It felt like my thoughts were so cluttered, like a messy room, and I was able to tidy everything away and find that there was a floor that I never knew there was, a shiny floor. And all I'd ever seen was clutter in my mind, in my heart, even. And I could wipe away, it took ages, minutes and minutes, or however long it was, to just clear it all away. Because, so you listen, you focus on seeking, you're calm, and then a thought comes in, oh, I need to do that. And you push it away, and you keep pushing these thoughts away that are interfering with seeking and listening. And eventually you do get this sense of the floor, of an empty space where you can listen. And that was what my spirit was craving. That was what I needed. And it really, really helped me. And it gave me so much joy. It gave me it gave me the sense of belonging. I could just, I'm home. And it just got better and better from there. You know, the Red Book, learning about faith in action, how faith, that for me is faith. That's how it ought to be for me. Faith in action, active faith. And I got as involved as I possibly could. I learnt about climate justice. I went on climate marches. I worked with not worked, voluntary worked, I suppose, for Extinction. I did things that aligned with my conscience broadly. I had some misgivings about exile, about Extinction Rebellion, that is, um, that I still kind of have. I'm absolutely up for direct activism. My dear friends have been on the front line of that, who you've interviewed, I believe. Um, but I don't know, the spaces felt privileged, and I think that's an open question. It we have if one has privilege, that's white privilege or any other kind of privilege that intersects with that, I you should probably use it. You should do something, and that there are so many different ways to to try and act and put your faith in action. For me, there are sort of barriers to Just Stop Oil and XR. Main one being, of course, that I'm a a carer. I'm a mother to two children and two young girls, and I couldn't go to prison because who would look after them? So there's that, I guess. But I do try and support those as much as I can. So I did something called the Climate Justice Dialogues, where we did I worked with Claire Farrell and another Quaker called Ben Mango, and um we did this for a good while, where we did had Zoom sessions with people in critical literacy, where we would discuss what climate justice means. What is climate justice? So we went through. Well, Peggy McIntosh was the backpack lady, by the way. So I just remembered that. And then we would yeah, have a group of people, sometimes Quakers, sometimes not, and we would have a space where we facilitated dialogue and discussion, where no one had to worry about what they said, about saying the wrong thing and slipping up, because there was high emotions around unlearning, unpicking, unraveling sort of these pivotal aspects of our culture that we've never questioned before now, which is harder for some than it is for others. I'm in a privileged position, oddly, of not actually being wedded to very much at all. So I don't that the lack of belonging I've had in my life has meant that I don't mind throwing things off. You know, you tell me about our roots as a nation in colonialism, imperialism, and yeah, I don't have any. There's nothing about that. There's nothing about patriotism and the British way of life, the kind of hand-picked, cherry-picked history that you get taught in schools. There's nothing about that that makes me feel like it's difficult to let go of or that I want to defend or anything. I'm able to, I think the fact that I'm, I think radical thinking comes easier to me. I don't think it should be called radical, by the way. It seems radical only in contrast to what people have become used to. But I think that becomes easier for someone like me, to be fair to people who do have more of a sense of belonging. Um, just because I don't feel like I belong to ideologies or people or groups, it makes it easier to learn something and unlearn something and not feel too, yeah, not feel too like something difficult is happening necessarily. Um, but yeah, I did those and allow people to say what they thought and to work through that and to think about that without any judgment. So that I think that was a really positive thing. And we've gone. I took my little girl who was born in 2019. She's 5 now, but she came everywhere with me. Went to the Shell AGM, and we did anything that they called not too spicy, not too. Uh, we would do. Although Phil did get us. Yeah, he we were once with him, and I thought there's a couple of moments where I thought, oh no, but on the whole, no, we've been everywhere. Peace marches, climate justice marches. She's hilarious. We went to on one of the Shell AGMs that we went to. There were we were chanting and singing "Go to hell, Shell." That was one of them. Um, I won't sing. But that was the line in that chant, that song, and she was enjoying that. And then the next day we're in Romford, and we're making this. Went for this activity, this kids activity in the shopping centre. A lovely lady there in Romford shopping centre. She's like, okay, well, we're going to make a ladybird. And my daughter was like, yeah, that's great. So they started making this ladybird. So it's two paper plates. So I had to paint them. And then once they'd done the body, now for the shell. And she went, go to hell, shell. And I was simultaneously mortified and proud. It was a strange one, but very, yeah, mostly proud, I think. But it was just so funny. Um, yeah, so she got it, she is very much. She learning about the white poppy as well, and
Mm.
bringing her up to love peace and to hate war. This is emphasized in some of her children's books as well. Um, and to love each other, to recognize the light within, even when it's difficult to see. You know, I think, the way I'm bringing up both my children and all the activism I get involved with stems from my Quaker faith. That is the consolidating feature. And, it's like being a Quaker for me. What is it? Is it, at one level, it's a kind of handy spiritual container. I don't have to be worried anymore. I don't have to be so conflicted. I don't have to go, oh, I've got this faith and I just don't know what to do with it. I don't know how I can be an atheist. It's allowed me to be my spiritual self by taking away anything that restricted, anything that kind of contradicted my the elements of my faith that made it what it was. So at the same time, the boundaries of faith that it does have, I feel very, make a lot of sense to me. And it's part of who I am. It's part of what I believe and what I've always believed. You can see resonances of it when I was tiny. And for me, it cuts down to the what matters about faith, about being human. I don't think you need. I'm a Quaker who thinks that you don't need to have a theist kind of paradigm here. Um, I'm technically part of non-theist friends as well, which incorporates atheists and agnostics and everything in between and outside of that. I love that kind of lack of prescription. You might say anything goes. That's not the case. There are parts of our faith that I think that we all share that unite us, but I love how much wriggle room there is. you know it's interesting that I find myself, even with the Quakers, with with how permissive we are as Quakers, I still somehow find myself on the fringes. I think I always will, whatever I do, wherever I go, whatever I affiliate myself with, I'll always somewhat be on the fringes, and I found myself on those fringes, I guess, through the activism side of things. I really am inspired by early Quakers who did radical things, who stood up for what was right. You know, I read about Benjamin Lay recently, in his theatrics, and his dedication to the truth in rejecting slavery. You know, it's we've got a complicated past. I say complicated. We've got the Quaker history is problematic in the same way as history is in this country generally, with the same problems. And I think it's really important to be able to kind of face up to that now in our activism, and I think our truth testimony is more important than ever. To be able to be humble, to be able to recognize the harm that came from colonialism, the bloodshed, the continuing neo-colonialism in the form of climate breakdown and the causes of climate breakdown, and our fossil fuel obsession with growth, economic growth, and GDP, and everything that atomizes us. I am part of a movement within Quakers that cares deeply about connecting us together, about our interdependence with each other, how we need each other. We need the planet that we are part of. We are part of nature. And I try to immerse myself in everything that reminds me of that through the art. There's an exhibition, there's one called Dear Earth, at the Barbican, whether it's a play, there's locally at Queen's Theatre, there was one, there's one called Dysbiosis, which was thinking about how we jar with our natural environment and the impacts of that. And then um, there's been others that remind us, that actually locate us in space, in our natural spaces. And for me, everything I do, all my activism, so I'm a Mums for Lungs member, and so I advocate for clean air, and I also do, climate justice. All of my activism always comes down to disability.
Mm.
I've found myself, I've fallen weirdly into disability activism. I was always going to, but it just didn't feel very conscious. It just felt very fluid the way that happened. I just found myself firefighting locally with some amazing mums, for my daughter and other children, like her in the borough's statutory right to free school transport,
Mm.
which seems crazy that one would have to do such a thing,
Mm.
but that is where we are. So, you know, um, I was in Parliament. I found myself in Parliament last week talking about disability poverty, to a very polished and eloquent MP who'd been doing it for years in a deliberately intimidating building, you know, and, and with a certain dress code and way of speaking and way of doing and way of life that is exclusionary. And I kind of dropped the panic attacks there in a sense, um, of knowing deep in my heart that there is no hierarchy, that it's a fabricated hierarchy that has got dire implications for people at the bottom, like my daughter. And wanting to stand up for that. It's interesting for me, my activism, because I am at the sharp end of it. Not the very sharp end. I'm not at the sharpest end, but I'm at a sharper end than most people I know. So I don't own my own house. I'm in unsuitable accommodation, really, for a child that doesn't walk, having to carry her upstairs in a masonette. You know, single glazed windows, forced to give up my career as an unpaid. I was in a really good career as head of philosophy at sixth form college, and then I'd become an unpaid carer. It's hard. Life is hard. I can't do a lot of these things. Um, but I do what is within my power. So I'm involved in all these different groups and things like that, but I recognize that my family come first and my energy levels come first. If I can do something, I will. And if I can't, I've forgiven myself and I can just drop that. But yeah, I I went to Boston recently in the USA, of all places. I was flown out there um to go to a conference to represent CDKL5 UK. And it was the most incredible thing where there were top scientists, researchers, clinicians about CDKL5 staying in a hotel and all the flights paid for. And then I realized who was funding it. And the funding of all of that was oil.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's these two incredible people with a gorgeous daughter with CDKL5 who are invested in oil. And it made me feel so worried. I was sat on the plane. I had no friend to talk to, so I wrote a poem instead. And it allowed me to process my thoughts and realize that when you're like me, when you're among people at the bottom, we have access to those at the bottom of society's hierarchy, you have no choice but to get your hands dirty. It helped me to recognize that a lot of activism, is the preserve of the privileged. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that means that probably is, in the sense that if you've got privilege, use it, speak the truth. But for me, I always have to recognize that I do have social vulnerabilities, in anything I do. And that involved me processing that, yeah, you do rely on others. People, you can't be ethically consistent. My inclination is to be consistent, This is bad, that's good. And that's the danger, I think, of some activism. I'm starting to think now because it categorizes that is that the lexicon of war? They're bad, we're good.
Mm.
Fossil fuels bad, renewable energy good. Even something as obviously binary as that. Actually, maybe the more we talk like that, the less we are able to talk to each other peacefully. On the other hand, people don't want to give up on their truth testimony. If it's telling the truth to say, well, actually, fossil fuel excavation is bad, and we can't compromise on that, then where are we? But I think these are interesting questions. They're fascinating questions, and they're much easier to see when you are close to the bottom of the pile. It's easier to recognize just how hard it is to how much you rely on others and how hard it is to be consistent ethically when the person that you're outside an AGM shouting about is actually funding life-saving research that could help your daughter.
Mm.
Yeah, interesting philosophical conundrums.
Well, and it's a remarkable story, Ruth, of coming from that, I think you said 5-year-old girl being asked if you wanted Jesus to come into your heart, and here you are saying you're part of the non-theist network amongst Quakers, and coming back around to kind of, as you say, philosophical conundrums. Well, one of the things that's been on my mind in recent years is when you said about kind of being honest with ourselves and being radical and being, telling the truth. I've started to wonder whether Quakers are ourselves becoming a bit um, monocultural is perhaps one way somebody phrased it as monoculture. Um, but that sense of are we have we stopped challenging ourselves? Are we creating a new orthodoxy? Um, And I suppose the fundamental question is where do we get the truth from? How do we know we're telling the truth? How do we know that is the truth? And I'm just intrigued by the final anecdote you just gave about being on that plane and thinking about these things.
Yeah,
If it's not a personal relationship with God,
yeah.
how do you know you've got a handle on the truth?
I think, like with a lot of religions, often the conscience is what everything comes down to. And again, like with a lot of religions, it's not the conscience on its own. The conscience isn't a lone ranger. The conscience needs to be fed, nourished. I think if you're doing that by, you know, for me, or for us, meeting for worship and by truths that we can agree on that brought us here, the values, not the gifts of the spirit, as I've talked about earlier, not wealth and status and narratives, but truth, humanity, shared humanity, the enduring truths that we do agree on that stem from love and humility. I think focusing on those, I'd also think, I do think that a truth with a capital T is problematic. I do think truth is perspectival. The truth, the objective truth, is not something, that whole idea is divisive, isn't it? It's um it's divisive to suggest there's one truth because there are different takes on there's either different takes on the truth or there's many different ways of couching something truthfully,
Mhm.
like couching the same thing truthfully. So people talk about my truth and then the truth. I think if we talk about my truth, we can only do that in the context of everybody else. Um, in the sense that I think we need to recognize when talking about my truth that my truth impacts other people and that theirs impacts me. So if my truth is just because is to, you know, drive a diesel car, for example, because that's what that's part of what I want to do, and that's partly, and I believe it's the right thing to do for different reasons around. Um, I'm a single, say I was a single parent, or I was, or that's the way life goes, and that's it'd be more convenient. I couldn't get to my job if I didn't, that kind of thing. Whereas someone else has got asthma and is living close to, close to a busy road, and it's impacting their health, and that's their truth. And or deeper truths that about our lifestyles that are rooted in racism, a long history of that. It's not okay to say, well, I didn't know about that, or haven't looked into that, or ableism or disableism. We need to, I think we need to learn more about each other and about how our
Mm.
existence and our truth is not isolated to our own experiences, it impacts others. But not to the degree that you never do anything, because that kind of thinking can go, oh no, what I need to overthink everything, and I am an overthinker. But I do think there should be, I think we need to, if we do care about each other, if we do care about injustice, we do need to be listening to people like unpaid carers, and we need to listen to people who are at the bottom of the pile and uphold.
Yeah. So what is your hopes or fears perhaps for Quakerism as a community, as a church? What the idea for these eh, talks and interviews came from the Future of Quakerism conference that I went to a couple of months ago. Do you have any, would you say, positives or negatives about Quakerism?
Yeah, yeah. I haven't always felt welcome in Quaker spaces. And often when that happens, the response you get from seasoned Quakers is, well, Quakers are human. But
Mm,
I think that's true. And but I think it's possible to share uncomfortable truths without being accused of expecting people to be perfect. I think the less defensive we are, the more we listen to people about uncomfortable things, the better we'll be as a society.
mm,
I think that there is a ripple around the edge of Quakers that is unsettled. I think there's a centre of Quakers where you get, you know, where where there's a rhythm, but I think Quakers have got quite comfortable, um, maybe too comfortable. I don't want to say Quaker spaces often feel quite privileged. There's a calmness that comes, I don't know. I mean, I wrote this thing about how I don't think peace is at all simple, like we say it is.
mm,
Peacefulness that we think we're an authority on, I don't think we are, comes off the back of a lot of bloodshed and a lot of hurt and a lot of pain. Like British values that they used to make me teach when I was a teacher. It's we enjoy things that seem peaceful, like democracy, on the back of a lot of suffering, a lot of injustice, and not and distinctly unpeaceful, violent methods that got us there. So, what kind of authority are we on peace anyway? But I think there's a calmness rather than a peace about Quakers that is not felt by those of us who just every day is a struggle. Um, and we
and
don't.
of course the thing about that is that while you can see problems in that calmness, of course, it does also provide a stability, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for cups of tea, biscuits, and there's a lot to be said, and there is a stability about that. And people, are doing their best within what they have, and their own processes and their own journeys and their own,
Mm,
everybody's at different places, and that and who and I'm not telling you about. I'm talking to you about where I find myself.
mm,
Um, but it may be that I'm not. It will be that I'm not where I need. I'm a work in progress, like I said. But find I find it frustrating within Quaker faith, Quaker communities. I feel like we talk about things like anti-racism and then we don't follow it up enough.
mm.
We're not bold enough. I think that we could be bolder and should be bolder. I did my Eva Cox scholarship about how climate justice hits women and girls in the global south the hardest, disabled people. I think we should make more of that. I think we should be more inclusive. I know you hear this a lot and then you go like, how are we going to? It's all very well for me to say we should be more inclusive, but I do think that I don't always feel that I fit in. I don't always feel very welcome or very like I fit in with the values and the faith, but the actual experience of it, not always.
Mm.
Find it quite frustrating sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, this is the interesting thing, isn't it? And I'm sure many people listening will find your story to be, a complete inspiration of how to think their own faith journey, if you like, and activism. Because you sound like a very, you're putting your faith into action, aren't you? You sound very much activist in how you live your life. Um, and I suppose what I'm just thinking about what that means for us as a community. Um, because I suppose the thing that I'm really trying to explore with people is when we don't agree, you know, how do we manage that? And for example, people come across somebody like yourself who've got very firm, views about what needs to be done, especially around something like disabled children when you have such personal experience. But what if people don't agree, and how do we become a church community that is able to tolerate different viewpoints? And as you say, in a way that is genuinely peace building.
It's hard. You know what? Our Quaker peace testimony is being lived out at the moment in the form of mediation type thinking, isn't it? So you get kind of happens in schools and things like that. But I fundamentally distrust that because I don't think peace is necessarily about getting on with people who you don't agree with. That feels like that's at the bottom of the peace work. But I don't actually agree with that. I think it's about power imbalance. I think war and dissonance originates with power imbalances. And I also think that it's not wise for somebody to go into a situation of mediation, say, where they've been hurt and wronged, because you can't trust that other person to be honest. In fact, if they're hurting and wronging you, they probably won't be, you
Mm.
know? So there needs to be a level playing field. And the whole point is that there's a power imbalance. So someone on the other end of that is not going to go into a mediating where the parameters are weighted against them for all sorts of reasons, real reasons, structural reasons, within the Quaker system or outside of it, or both probably, because they're one's a microcosm of the other to a certain extent. I think that would be ill-advised. I certainly wouldn't do it, and I've done it in the past because I've been advised to. It has not gone well. Now I can see why it wouldn't. I don't. I think there needs to be a recognition that peace is more than it seems. It's not just, like I said, for one, our hands are dirty. We can't. We are not clean Quakers, peaceful Quakers. We are not. None of us are. I'm not. No one is. We are not the authorities on peace. But
Yeah.
also, like, if we do love peace and we want to work towards peace, I think there should be a recognition of power imbalances. And I do think that right now, um, there are structures within the Quaker setup, um, that are brilliant. People work very hard, all the rest of it, and do so in good faith, but they are impacted. We are impacted as a structure, by the same sorts of weights that weigh on any hierarchy and any kind of structure like that. And I think that you human nature coupled with cultural expectations that are historically embedded in this society do lead you to favour someone who is weightier than the other. Um, they do, but the way someone talks, the way they dress, who they remind you of, who they, what their finances, all these things. I think how polished you sound, how I've learned to navigate, these things. I'm I'm still learning to navigate how to talk to people, how to get my point across without endangering myself,
Yeah.
to more vulnerability in society. Some people don't have to worry about that. You're not managing any of that. You can just be, and that must come with a certain confidence and a certain freedom just to spout, just to talk, and not hampered by, oh no, what if I get it wrong? Or what if later I wish I'd never said that and I feel really sorry and I can't take it back? Or what if someone really got hurt and I never know, and they're carrying that all that way and I never knew that I'd said it. And it wasn't until years that I learned, I think about this sort of stuff all the time, but like some people just don't. When people are upheld to such a degree that they never really slip, then what reason have they got to question themselves or to even be aware of that level of questioning when everybody's saying, yes, yes, you're great? And I heard that at British Yearly meeting, people doing that,
Mm.
for, and and they would say to me, well, it's just, you get that everywhere. Yeah, you do. But we can be better than that. And we can actually, like I said to you, there's no status in disability, there's no status in poverty. And I think we need to listen to, we should have a Swarthmore lecturer that works in B&Q. That's what we should have. That's what my good friend from Ilford said to me once, and she was right. We need people, we need to stop. We've learned about things like you know, uh, our education system, which we just think, oh, yeah, it's fine. That's education. That's objective. That's just learning. No, it's not. It's needing desperately to be decolonialized now. It's it is, we're learning that actually indigenous knowledge is a whole new paradigm that can teach us, that we can learn from. Our whole paradigm of learning is problematic. So why do we keep putting educated people in high places within Quakers? Why do we think that? Why do we assume? Look at the powers and structures that have got us to where we are in the climate crisis and the poly crisis that we face, war and cost of living crisis, poverty, climate injustice. What has brought us there. Look at the people. Look where they go. Look where I was the other day in Parliament. You got privileges that get you to Eton and then Oxbridge,
Mm.
and you end up in this big imposing building with all this fancy pants architecture and all these suits and things. That would have given me a massive panic attack years ago, but nowadays I
Yeah.
don't care. I live my testimony in the sense that I get that now. And actually, Quakers should get that. They should talk to people at the bottom and lift them up. And that means losing some of your own privilege, shedding it. And what does that mean? That's a
Well,
difficult
does
thing.
does it? I suppose is it essentially a kind of an anarchist vision of upsetting, of upskittling the system? Is that fundamentally what the radical vision is that you are working towards?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm only one person in this. All I know is that probably, to be honest, I think, yeah, well, I'm in the Socialist Society. I'm on the committee in the Quaker Socialist Society, and I do think that at the centre of everything we do, faith in action should be about centering and upholding the central testimony that there is a light of God in everyone. And I think others, we need to stop trampling on other people's lights and recognize that we don't do this deliberately. Just by existing in the ways that we do, in the structures that we do, we are trampling on other people all the time, and it's unavoidable. We all do it. We use Amazon, we use Google, um, the clothes that we buy, the food that we buy, the lifestyles that we have. We are all doing it all the time. If we, it's unfair. If there was some kind of judgment afterwards, which I don't think there is, it's not going to look good, is it? Even for me, I haven't got a lot compared to a lot of people, but I do it. I'm a complete hypocrite. I use all these search engines. I do. I'm in, and I have unsustainable habits. You know. Um, I think that we need to all recognize that. To be honest, I think capitalism and the thoughts of the kind of processes of capitalism, that thought process. I think this whole constant growth, I think we need to think about together. I think we need to realize the relationship between the economy and economic thinking, climate justice, and how that feeds into our structures, and how that's and the politics of Quakers. There is a politics of Quakers in the UK, and wherever possible, we need to find ways of taking Helen Minnis's Swarthmore lecture seriously. How do we go to the chilly waters? How do we really, are we serious about that? Do we just want cups of tea? Do we just want to keep things as they are?
Mm.
Or do we want to be really, really honest about privilege and oppression and power in Dunham, and power?
But do you
Um,
recognise that not everybody would agree with that analysis?
yeah, of course.
And that we
Yeah,
have to all live together, I suppose.
I think we do all need to live together, and I haven't got the answers. Um, I do think we definitely need to do that, and I'm humbled so often. At one minute I think I'm an activist, and I'm taking my council to court at the moment over an illegal landfill site and doing things like that. You think you were there with a placard, and then someone paid, then someone who is someone who's actively benefiting from oil and is flying you over to Boston in a nice hotel.
Yeah.
All this and then you suddenly think, oh my, I don't have a clue. I I wouldn't listen to me. I think I know it. I think I know who I am. I'm an activist. Well, I'm not, and it's just that constant. It's a bit like science, where you go with what you feel at that point. You have good reasons, hopefully the best reasons that you scrutinize within yourself, and then something comes crashing in to ruin it. You go somewhere else that you weren't expecting to go, which is where I've come. And I'll keep getting those. And it's that kind of welcoming that. You're not expecting science to go where you want it to go. You're not expecting to have a hypothesis and then meet that hypothesis, validate it or verify it. It's the expectation to get it wrong, to be upended. Um, and it's not so much about upending the Quakers as it is about the willingness to upend um, our own prejudices, I guess, and
Mm.
the things that um, the sort of ballast, the anchors that we attach ourselves to.
Mm.
Sometimes just being able to see them, that they're not as fundamental as they feel like they are in the context of others, and sometimes, yeah, recognizing when we need to change that and when we need to. I think change needs to come within ourselves, and when it comes to, I mean, there's a lot of good about the Quakers. There's a lot of good. I'm an impatient Quaker. It's about being patient and slow and all this sort of thing. But and I think there's merit in that and not being all gung ho about everything. But yeah, I do think there needs to be more about listening to disenfranchised people,
Mm.
um, in order to uphold, and listening to as many perspectives as as possible.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we are all works in progress, is just the phrase you've used, Ruth. And it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. And I think, yeah, I think Quakers are still a work in progress, aren't we, as a community? So you're not alone there. Well, thank you very much for talking to me. Let's finish there, and thanks for your time today.
Thank you. Lovely to talk to you, Emma.